The moment he yelled, "We don't serve your kind here," the whole restaurant went silent, except for the soft clink of a wine glass, as the youngest boy turned to his mother and whispered, "Is he allowed to talk to us like that?" What the restaurant owner didn't know was that the family he just humiliated owned the deed to his entire building. On a warm Friday evening in Charleston, South Carolina, the Blake family arrived at Elcott Grill, an upscale, Southern fusion restaurant nestled between artisan shops and cobblestone sidewalks. The Blakes were well dressed. Elijah Blake, 42, wore a tailored navy suit. His wife, Denise, 39, was in an emerald green wrap dress that shimmered under the early evening sun. Their two children, Mason, 10, and Chloe, 12, were excited. Tonight wasn't just any night. It was Mason's birthday. The reservation had been made a week in advance. The hostess even called that morning to confirm. But as they stepped inside, they were met with instant tension. The hostess, a young woman in her 20s, glanced nervously toward the bar where a tall, red-faced man was sipping scotch and barking orders at the waitstaff. That was Doug Whitmore, the owner of Elcott Grill. Known for his old-school ways, Doug was proud of what he called preserving tradition, and for reasons no one dared say out loud, that tradition rarely involved black patrons sitting at his best tables. As the Blake family approached the front desk, Denise smiled warmly and said, "Hi, reservation for Blake. Party of 4. The hostess's fingers froze over the screen. She stammered, let me check." But before she could finish, Doug marched over, his boots echoing across the hardwood floor. "What's going on here?" he asked, not even looking at the family. "They have a reservation, sir," the hostess replied. Doug scoffed. "Not anymore, they don't." He then turned directly to Elijah and said, loud enough for every table to hear, "This place has a certain image. We don't serve people like you. You folks need to leave." Gasps rippled through the restaurant. A fork clattered to the floor. Chloe's eyes welled up. Mason looked confused, turning to his dad, who was standing frozen in disbelief. Denise's lip quivered, but she held it together for the kids. Elijah stepped forward, voice calm but powerful. "We have a confirmed reservation, and we're here to celebrate our son's birthday. What's your reason for this discrimination?" Doug grinned smugly and shrugged. "Call it instinct. You don't belong here." The Blake family left without a scene. But as they stepped outside, Denise pulled out her phone. "I'm calling Curtis," she said. "He's not going to believe this." Curtis Caldwell was not just the family's longtime friend. He was also Elijah's business partner. Together, Elijah and Curtis had formed Blake and Caldwell Real Estate Holdings, a commercial property group that quietly purchased historical buildings in Charleston for preservation and equity development. And as of 3 months ago, they were the new landlords of 813 Willow Street. That's right, Elcott Grill's building. Elijah had visited the site once during escrow but never went inside. They had inherited a dozen tenants with the purchase, and Doug Whitmore's lease was already in the system. Doug never bothered to meet his new landlords. He never asked. And now, that ignorance was about to cost him everything. 3 days later, Doug received an envelope marked urgent, tenant action required. Inside was a notice of lease termination. Effective immediately. The reason: violation of the Civil Rights Act, breach of moral and ethical conduct clauses, and racial discrimination on private premises. Doug stormed into the property management office fuming. "This is bull. Who the hell do they think they are, kicking me out of my own place?" he shouted. The receptionist, calmly sipping coffee, handed him a sealed letter with a sticky note on it. "Meet your landlord." He ripped it open. Inside was a photo, taken from a security camera outside Elcott Grill. It showed Doug yelling at the Blake family. Next to it was a handwritten note from Elijah. "Next time you decide someone doesn't belong, make sure they don't hold the deed." News travels fast in Charleston. Within 48 hours, a local blogger had picked up the story. The headline read, "Restaurant owner kicks out Black family. Turns out they own the building." Social media exploded. People began leaving one-star reviews. Protesters stood outside Elcott Grill holding signs that read, "Racism isn't tradition," and "Welcome to the New South." Doug tried to do damage control. He released a lukewarm apology on Facebook. If I came across as rude, it wasn't about race. It was about protecting the atmosphere of my business. That only made it worse. Within a week, Doug was evicted. The building was reclaimed by Blake and Caldwell. And the new tenant? A black-owned family-style soul food restaurant called Chloe's Table, named after Elijah's daughter. Opening day of Chloe's Table was nothing short of a celebration. Denise, now managing the restaurant, welcomed families of all backgrounds. Mason had his second birthday party there, this time surrounded by joy, community, and a line of guests stretching around the block. Inside the entryway hung a photo of the Blake family. Next to it, a framed copy of the eviction notice. It served as both a warning and a symbol of victory. Doug, meanwhile, was never able to bounce back. Word had spread to investors. His name was now associated with racial bias, and none of the local lenders or partners would touch him. He sold off his remaining businesses and quietly left Charleston. But the Blakes, they expanded. They started a fund to help minority-owned businesses acquire property in historically exclusive areas. Their mission, to never let another family feel the way they felt that night. Discrimination may speak loud, but ownership speaks louder. When you control the land, you control the rules. And in a world that often tries to deny people their seat at the table, sometimes the most powerful move is to own the building where the table sits. Just when things seemed to be settling, Denise received a letter in the mail. No return address. Just one line on the card inside. You don't belong in this town. Leave or pay the price. And just like that, the past wasn't finished with them. Charleston, South Carolina, wore its charm like a disguise. Sweet tea on porches, historic tours on cobblestone streets, and Spanish moss draped over centuries-old oak trees. But beneath that southern elegance, the Blakes were learning. Some people were still haunted by the past, and determined to protect it. Since opening Chloe's Table, the Blake family had received an outpouring of support from most of the community. Reviews were glowing, customers were diverse, and the food, crafted from family recipes, brought people together. But after that anonymous letter, Denise couldn't sleep. She read it again in the kitchen under low light while Elijah reviewed invoices. "Do you think it's real?" she asked quietly. Elijah stared at the letter, then at his wife. "It's more than just a threat. It's a reminder that some folks see our success as their loss." Days passed. Then, the small incidents started. A broken window in the back kitchen with no sign of forced entry. A foul odor in the pantry, rotten meat deliberately left behind. Mason's bike, stolen from their backyard and later found burnt in a nearby alley. At first, Elijah didn't want to believe it was targeted. But Denise knew. She'd seen it before, growing up in Alabama. Success painted on black skin made some people feel afraid. Or worse, enraged. Still, they pressed on. They installed security cameras, changed locks, and filed reports. Police promised to keep an eye out, but no one was arrested. And no suspects emerged. Then came the second letter. "You didn't listen. Now we come for what you love." This time, the envelope held a photo, Chloe walking home from school, circled in red ink. Denise dropped the letter. Her hands trembled. Elijah stared at the image, his breath catching in his chest. That night, the Blake household was full of unspoken fear. Chloe sat on the couch, headphones on, unaware. Mason played with his tablet, carefree. But their parents sat at the kitchen table, locked in quiet, desperate conversation. "Maybe we should pull her out of school," Denise said. "And send what message?" Elijah shot back, voice cracking. "That they can scare us into hiding? That they still own us." "She's just a child," Denise whispered. "What if they really mean it?" Elijah buried his face in his hands. For the first time, his strength wavered. The next day, Elijah called Curtis Caldwell. They'd built an empire together, but this wasn't business, it was survival. "I need help," Elijah said simply. "This is no longer just about real estate. It's about our lives." Curtis showed up that evening with 2 private security guards and a grim expression. "I have connections in Atlanta, former FBI. Let's dig into this. Someone is watching you, and they left a trail." They reviewed footage, traced delivery marks on the envelopes, and flagged every suspicious vehicle parked near the restaurant. Curtis pulled strings to get enhanced security for the family, even temporarily relocating Chloe and Mason to his gated estate for safety. Still, the threats continued. 3 weeks after the first letter, a breakthrough came. A fingerprint on the second envelope led to a match. Dean Whitmore, Doug Whitmore's younger cousin. Dean was a member of a private social club known for its exclusivity and its whispered racism. He had no criminal record, but deep ties to old money, former police, and political influencers in Charleston. The Blakes weren't just fighting one man, they were threatening a system. Elijah wanted justice. Denise wanted peace. But now they were staring at something far bigger than they'd ever imagined. Curtis, always calm, leaned forward with a document in hand. "This is bigger than Dean," he said. "I traced funds from his business account to a local PAC that funds legal intimidation campaigns against black property owners. They call it urban preservation. I call it a war." Elijah and Curtis made a move. They filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. They contacted the local paper to expose the hate-fueled intimidation, and they held a press conference on the steps of the very building Doug was kicked out of. The media showed up. So did supporters. Denise stood tall at the mic, holding Chloe's hand. "We are not leaving. We belong here. Our children will walk these streets without fear." The crowd erupted in applause, and for a moment, it felt like victory. But that night, underneath the glow of triumph, came the most chilling moment of all. As Elijah walked to his car after locking up Chloe's table, he noticed something off. The back alley was darker than usual. A faint ticking echoed from somewhere nearby. He turned, slowly. Then he saw it. A red spray-painted message on the restaurant's back door. "This is your last warning." Below it, a small, charred bundle wrapped in cloth. Elijah approached with cautious steps. As he unwrapped it, his heart nearly stopped. Inside was Chloe's doll, burned, missing an eye, with a matchbox beside it. Elijah staggered backward, gripping the wall. Tears welled in his eyes, not from fear, but rage. Someone wasn't just trying to scare them anymore. They were sending a promise. For most of Charleston, Chloe's table had become a symbol of hope. But behind the warm plates of catfish and cornbread, Denise's heart raced every time a customer lingered too long near the kitchen. Every glance, every new face, she questioned them all. The family had quietly increased security. Plainclothes officers now ate lunch near the window. Curtis hired 2 off-duty detectives to monitor suspicious activity. But still, nothing could shake the feeling that danger was creeping in from somewhere they couldn't see. Detective Layla Monroe, one of Curtis's contacts from Atlanta, came down to help. She was sharp, relentless, and had seen hate crime networks hidden in plain sight before. "This is organized," she said, looking over the timeline. "Not just one person. This has roots." Layla traced the fingerprints on the charred doll to a second suspect, Jake Landry, a maintenance worker who once did repairs on the building under Doug Whitmore's ownership. Jake was also tied to the Sovereign Flame, a quiet group known for operating under old Southern heritage charities and property councils. On the surface, they preached preservation. Behind the curtain, intimidation, arson, harassment, even voter suppression. The real shock came when Layla matched a license plate seen circling the Blakes' neighborhood with security footage from a downtown parking garage. The plate belonged to someone Elijah knew personally, Kurt Maddox, one of his former fraternity brothers from college. They'd done business together years ago. Kurt had even attended Mason's christening. But behind the scenes, Kurt had been funding anti-gentrification task forces that pushed black-owned businesses out of downtown districts. Elijah sat in silence as Layla showed him the evidence. "You trusted him," she said softly, "but he saw your rise as a threat to what he calls the order." Elijah's hands trembled. His entire body went still. "It was never just about a restaurant," he said quietly. It was about keeping the gate closed to people like us. The next day, Chloe found her mother crying in the pantry, something she'd never seen before. Denise had always been the strong one, the planner, the protector. But now, she couldn't hold it in. "I can't breathe, Elijah," she said later that night. "We won. We rebuilt. We did everything right. And now I'm watching our kids live in fear, waiting for the next letter to come." Elijah hugged her tightly, closing his eyes. "We are not going to break," he said. "We built this city the right way. We'll defend it the right way too." Curtis, Layla, and the Blakes decided it was time to flip the script. They used public records to leak a false press release stating the Blakes were selling the building and leaving Charleston for Atlanta. The news spread fast, especially in the wrong circles. 2 nights later, a figure appeared in the alley behind the restaurant, assuming no one was watching. He placed a small metal device on the back door, an accelerant rigged for remote ignition. But this time, cameras were rolling. Officers were in place. The trap was set. The man was arrested on the spot. His name, Gerald "Red" Tate, former firefighter, and a Sovereign Flame recruiter. Red didn't talk right away. But once he did, the entire network began to unravel. He admitted to surveilling the Blake family, named Jake Landry and Dean Whitmore as financial backers. But most shocking, he revealed they weren't acting alone. There was someone inside the city council, working to delay permits, deny inspections, and subtly push black businesses out using red tape and threats. Layla asked him one final question. "Why them? Why the Blakes?" Red leaned forward and said, "Because they made people think they belong in places we built. That's dangerous." Layla's jaw tightened. "You built nothing. You inherited fear. And you weaponized it." When the news broke that a hate group had infiltrated the city, public opinion shifted hard and fast. Protests erupted, but not against the Blakes. This time, they were aimed at the old money institutions that had allowed racism to fester under bureaucracy and polite smiles. One by one, city council members began to resign. Investigations were launched. And Chloe's table? It became a headquarters for justice. A place where stories were told, voices were amplified, and survivors of intimidation found community. But just as the tide began to turn, a final letter arrived. This one wasn't threatening. It was personal. A single page, handwritten. Folded inside was a photo of Elijah's father, a man he hadn't seen since he was 7, long presumed dead, vanished under mysterious circumstances. At the bottom of the note, 5 chilling words. "Your father knew too much." Elijah stared at the note, heart racing. What did his father have to do with this hate group? What secrets had been buried for decades? And was his father really gone? Elijah Blake was only 7 years old when his father, Jeremiah Blake, disappeared. The official story said he walked out one night and never came back. No note, no calls, no body, just silence. The family never fully recovered. His mother buried her grief in prayer. Elijah buried it in ambition. He told himself it was abandonment. Easier that way. But now, holding that old photograph, creased, faded, and clearly recent, his entire childhood cracked open like an old wound. Elijah took the letter to Detective Layla Monroe the next morning. She scanned it carefully. "This isn't a random threat," she said. "Someone's pulling you into something deeper. Something they've been hiding for decades." Using the photo, Layla traced the background to an abandoned mill outside of Somerville, 30 miles from Charleston. The mill had been shut down since the 80s, but records showed it had once been used as a community employment program for formerly incarcerated black men. It was run, in part, by a now-defunct foundation called the Ashwood Preservation Trust. Curtis leaned over the file. "My grandfather warned me about Ashwood. Said they were a front, pretending to help black men re-enter society, but really exploiting them for labor." Elijah's voice went low. "My dad worked there, right before he vanished." That afternoon, Elijah and Layla visited the decaying Ashwood Mill. Vines crawled up rusted siding. Windows were shattered. Inside, The air was thick with dust and secrets. In one office, they found a metal filing cabinet. Locked. Layla picked it open. Inside, dozens of yellowed manila folders, water-damaged but legible. One of them had Jeremiah Blake's name on it. Elijah opened it with trembling hands. There were employment records, a performance report, and a handwritten letter from Jeremiah to someone named D.C. The letter read, "I've seen what they're doing. The real books, the real money, and the threats. If something happens to me, protect my son. Protect Elijah." Elijah stepped back, stunned. His father hadn't abandoned him. He had tried to protect him. Back in Charleston, Layla dug deeper into the Ashwood Preservation Trust. Two names kept popping up on the board of directors, Richard Maddox and Samuel Whitmore. Elijah's jaw tightened. Whitmore, Doug's grandfather. And Maddox, that's Kurt's father. It all made sense now. The same families who tried to drive the Blakes out today were the same ones who profited off the exploitation of black labor 30 years ago. Elijah's father hadn't just uncovered financial fraud. He had uncovered a network, one built on black pain, passed down through generations. As Elijah processed the weight of this legacy, Denise had her own breakthrough. While organizing donations at Chloe's table, she came across a folded note slipped into the register drawer. It read, "You think you're building something new, but the foundation was never yours. Go back to where you belong." But scribbled lightly in the corner, like an afterthought, were the initials, J.B. Denise froze. Jeremiah Blake. But why would he write that? Or was someone pretending to be him? Was he alive? Chloe's whisper. That night, as Denise tucked Chloe into bed, her daughter said something that stopped her cold. "Mommy, that man from the photo? I've seen him." Denise turned, heart skipping. "Where, baby?" Chloe pointed toward the window. "He was across the street last week, wearing a brown jacket. He looked right at me and smiled." Denise's breath caught. "Are you sure?" Chloe nodded. "He waved like he knew me." Elijah rushed to pull traffic camera footage from that street. They scanned hours of clips. Nothing. Then, at 2:47 p.m. Wednesday afternoon, a tall, older black man in a brown jacket crossed the frame. He looked straight into the camera. His face was worn, but familiar. It was Jeremiah Blake. Elijah nearly collapsed. "He's alive." But the joy didn't last long. As they enhanced the image, Layla noticed something else. A second man, just behind Jeremiah, walking closely, with a hand near his back pocket, where something metallic glinted. Layla froze the frame. "That's not a reunion," she whispered. "That's surveillance." Then she got a ping on her burner phone. A voice message. No caller ID. She played it on speaker. "You should have left well enough alone. He's not the only one we can make disappear." Elijah's hands clenched. They had found his father. But now someone else had found him too. The next morning, Elijah stood motionless in front of a police sketch artist screen, the enhanced image of his father frozen mid-stride on surveillance. Jeremiah's face looked older, yes, but his eyes still held the fire Elijah remembered from boyhood, the man who once lifted him high into the air and said, "One day, you'll build things that can't be burned down." Now, that man was in danger. Detective Layla Monroe wasn't waiting on local law enforcement anymore. "This is bigger than the Charleston PD," she told Elijah and Curtis. "There are too many ties, political donors, judges, even real estate developers with skin in this game." She called in a favor from an old contact in the U.S. Marshals Service. Within hours, a search warrant was issued to seize archived property and personnel records from the defunct Ashwood Preservation Trust, the very organization Jeremiah worked for before disappearing. What they found changed everything. The files revealed that Ashwood wasn't just a job placement program. It was a cover operation for forced labor, financial fraud, and land theft. Dozens of black men were lured into employment with fake housing and wage promises. Those who resisted or spoke out vanished. Many were listed as relocated. Others were marked with a single word: erased. Jeremiah Blake's folder had 3 red stamps across the last page: whistleblower, surveillance initiated, containment pending, and then a handwritten note dated 2 weeks before his disappearance. Blake won't back down. Last meeting with subject scheduled for July 9th. Safe house at Ridge Point. May need permanent resolution. Elijah stared at the file, rage boiling beneath his calm exterior. They planned to kill my father. With Layla, Elijah, and Curtis followed the trail to Ridge Point, an abandoned property once owned by a now-defunct shell corporation tied to the Maddox estate. The cabin was overgrown, hidden behind a curtain of moss-draped trees. It looked empty, but when they entered, dust flew up like ghosts from the floor. Curtis moved toward the back room. "Elijah," he called, "you need to see this." Inside the room was a cot, a desk, and a wall covered in newspaper clippings. Crime reports, political donations, property transfers, and one headline pinned dead center: "Local man vanishes after alleging corruption in landmark trust." Jeremiah's photo was next to it, and underneath it, handwritten in charcoal: "Still here, still watching, but not safe." That night, Elijah received an encrypted message: "No caller ID, just coordinates," and 3 words: "Come alone." Midnight. Despite Layla's warning, Elijah went. Denise begged him not to go alone, but Elijah needed answers, from the only man who could give them. The meeting point was beneath an old train trestle just outside the city limits. The night was thick with humidity and silence. At 12:04 a.m., a figure emerged from the shadows. Jeremiah Blake. He looked tired, thin, but alive. They stared at each other for a long moment. "You're real," Elijah whispered. Jeremiah nodded, eyes misted. "And you're taller than I ever imagined." They embraced, 3 decades of pain, confusion, and silence flooding between them. Jeremiah spoke quickly. "They tried to kill me, Eli. I exposed the money trail. I had the records. But before I could go public, they came. Maddox's men, Whitmore's fixers. They burned everything. But I escaped. Why didn't you come back?" Elijah asked, voice cracking. "They swore they'd kill you. And your mother. I watched from a distance. I couldn't risk them finding you." Jeremiah handed him a small, weathered hard drive. "This has everything. The original ledgers, names, judges, cops, even senators. If this goes public, Charleston will burn." Just as Elijah clutched the drive, headlights cut across the dark riverbank. A black SUV screeched to a stop. Doors flew open. Men in tactical black gear spilled out with weapons drawn. Jeremiah grabbed Elijah. "They found us. Go." Gunfire erupted, sharp, thunderous cracks ripping through the silence. Jeremiah shoved Elijah behind a concrete pillar. Then a shot rang out, louder, closer. Jeremiah fell. "Elijah," he rasped, blood on his lips. "Don't let them bury the truth again. Finish what I started." Elijah screamed his name, but Jeremiah didn't move. Gunfire echoed through the trees as Elijah cradled his father's body, refusing to believe the final breath had left Jeremiah's chest. The armed men, masked and ruthless, swept the clearing, but Elijah had already disappeared into the swamp, clutching the blood-stained hard drive and fueled by fury. He didn't stop running until the sky began to pale with dawn. Somewhere along the edge of the Cooper River, covered in mud, pain, and his father's blood, Elijah whispered through gritted teeth, "I swear to God, they won't bury you again." Elijah made it to Curtis's apartment by sunrise. Curtis barely opened the door before Elijah collapsed into his arms. "What happened?" Curtis gasped, pulling him inside. "They killed him," Elijah muttered. "But he gave me everything. It's all here." Curtis looked at the battered hard drive and turned pale. Layla arrived an hour later. She didn't flinch. "We can't go to the police," she said. They're in it. So are half the city attorneys and 2 of the sitting judges. We have to go federal, but smart. They devised a plan. Plan 1, encrypt and clone the drive. Plan 2, distribute it to 3 trusted news outlets and 2 civil rights attorneys. Plan 3, leak it piece by piece, names, transactions, and proof. Plan 4, let the truth speak so loud it couldn't be silenced. Within 48 hours, the first story dropped. Exclusive. Leaked files reveal secret trust exploited black workers for decades. Names were named. Whitmore. Maddox. City council members. 1 sitting U.S. senator. Audio recordings. Financial ledgers. Internal memos. The city exploded. Protests swept downtown Charleston. Chloe's table became ground zero for activists, journalists, and survivors. Denise stood on the front steps of the restaurant, holding Jeremiah's photo. He gave his life to expose this, she said into the microphone. But his voice lives through us. The crowd chanted, "Justice for Jeremiah. Justice for us all." In the weeks that followed, 16 public officials resigned. 2 high-ranking developers were indicted. Multiple law enforcement officers were suspended pending investigation. Federal agents confirmed that Jeremiah Blake had been on a watch list for years, wrongfully classified as a domestic threat by internal intelligence sources funded by private trust foundations. Elijah, once silent in grief, now stood boldly before cameras. "This isn't just my father's story," he said. "This is Charleston's reckoning." As the truth spread, so did danger. Curtis's office was ransacked. Denise received threatening voicemails in the middle of the night. Even Chloe's school received a bomb threat, later determined to be fake, but terrifying nonetheless. Layla stayed in Charleston under full protection, convinced someone was still pulling strings in the shadows. One night, while reviewing backup files, Elijah found something his father had buried deep. A folder marked, "Project Palmetto, Eyes Only." Inside were schematics, maps, names of parcels of land in Charleston, Savannah, and Columbia. Attached was a typed note, unsigned. They weren't just stealing labor. They were stealing land. Black-owned land, taken through code enforcement, fire, and intimidation. And now they want to redevelop it, laundered, renamed, and sold back at 10 times the value. And at the bottom, a list of still active operatives. The final name? Kurt Maddox. Elijah stared at the screen. Kurt Maddox, his former friend. His fraternity brother. The man who smiled at his wedding. The godfather to Mason. Curtis walked into the room. "You okay?" Elijah didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on the name. "Kurt's not just involved," he finally said. "He's leading it." Curtis exhaled. "You're going to confront him?" "No," Elijah whispered, a tear sliding down his cheek. "I'm going to expose him." He clicked print on the folder. And just then, boom, the house shook. Curtis lunged for the window. Outside, Elijah's car was engulfed in flames. A note had been left on the windshield, scrawled in ash. "You were warned. Next time, it's your family." It was nearly midnight when Elijah stood at the edge of Broadleaf Country Club, a gated estate where Charleston's old wealth gathered like moths around fading chandeliers. This was Kurt's world: country clubs, campaign dinners, private boardrooms with walls that whispered secrets and carried sins across generations. Elijah walked past security without resistance. He was expected. Inside, Kurt Maddox stood alone on the balcony, drink in hand, the city lights shimmering below. "Elijah," Kurt said coolly, not turning around. "I figured you'd come." Elijah said nothing for a long moment. Then, "My father's dead. Because of you." Kurt finally turned, his face still as marble. "We did what we had to do to keep the system balanced," he said. "Your father poked where he shouldn't have. You're doing the same." Elijah stepped closer, fire in his voice. "You funded the sovereign flame. You orchestrated the land grabs. You put a gun in the hands of the man who murdered my father." Kurt smirked, shrugging. "And you think exposing me will change anything? You really think Charleston will hand over its crown to you?" "No," Elijah said, "but it will never wear yours again." What Kurt didn't know was that Layla had wired Elijah before he ever entered the room. His words, his confession, his arrogance, all recorded. That same night, the audio was aired live by 3 major networks. Within hours, #Justice for Jeremiah was trending nationwide. And Kurt Maddox's empire collapsed like a house built on stolen ground. Indictments rolled in. The Maddox Trust was frozen. Senator Whitmore resigned in disgrace. And the city of Charleston passed the Jeremiah Blake Transparency Act, requiring all historical land transfers to be publicly reviewed, with reparations panels created to investigate theft of black property. Weeks later, Elijah stood before a quiet crowd as they laid Jeremiah Blake to rest, not in obscurity this time, but with full honor. Denise stood by his side, hand in hand. Curtis gave the eulogy. Chloe and Mason placed flowers on the casket. Elijah spoke last. "My father lived in the shadows so that we could stand in the light. He died for a truth this city tried to forget. But we remembered. And because we remembered, we are still here." The crowd murmured in agreement. Some wept. Some raised fists. Above them, the Charleston sky bloomed with golden light, dawn breaking over a city forever changed. A year later, Chloe's table had become more than a restaurant. It was now a community hub, a cultural archive, and the headquarters of the Jeremiah Blake Foundation, helping black families reclaim lost property and legacy across the South. Denise published a book titled Our Table, Our Story. Layla took a federal position investigating civil rights cold cases. Curtis ran for office, and won. As for Elijah, he stood before a group of young entrepreneurs at the Charleston Civic Hall, teaching them about land ownership, justice, and identity. And before he walked off the stage, he shared one last lesson. Life lesson. They thought they could take everything from us, our businesses, our land, our fathers, our future. But what they never understood is that you can't burn down a legacy built on truth. My father once told me, "Build what can't be burned." Now I know, he wasn't talking about buildings. He was talking about love, about dignity, about justice. We are still here, and we're not leaving.